Hey y'all, what's good? Thanks for checking out another edition of the Liberty Cast. I'm your host, Big E. This is actually going to be our last show of the year. We're going to take a little break and come back ready and raring to go in 2020. But this week, we're going to address this impeachment saga and what's going to happen next. The 2A sanctuary movement that has taken off in Virginia, a woman in Georgia who defended herself against a couple of home invading scumbags, and the dangers of weaponizing gun laws. And then we'll also talk about a man who gets 15 years in prison for burning the flag. We'll get into all of that and a whole lot more coming right up. Let's just get this out of the way. As you all know, the House passed 2 articles of impeachment, one for obstruction of Congress and the other for abusing his power. Whatevs. They keep invoking the Constitution, they keep invoking the founders, but I don't think they have a clue about what the founders wanted, and I don't think they have read the Constitution ever in their lives. And if they have, it was so long. I mean, come on. Some of these people have been, there are some members of the House who have been there since they tried to impeach Nixon. I mean, come on. But I said this on BZ's show last week, the bloviating Zeppelin on SHR Media. I was a guest on his show last Thursday. I've read the articles of impeachment, and there was not a crime listed. It read like the ramblings of a petulant child writing a note to their parents, telling them how mean they were and how much they hurt their feelings. This was supposed to be a sad day, a solemn day. They told us how solemn this was supposed to be, how prayerful they were before doing this.
Hey everyone, I am on my way to the United States House floor to impeach President Trump. Woo. On behalf of my incredible district, 13 districts strong. Let's do this.
I mean, she was downright giddy. Now, did they really expect us to believe this? Did they? I mean, they've been planning on this. They've been prepping for this. They said from the moment before he was inaugurated that they were planning on impeaching President Trump. And that was the same woman that gave us this gem.
People love you and you win. Woo! And when your son looks at you and says, Mama, look, you won, bullies don't win. And I said, baby, they don't, because we're going to go in there, we're going to impeach the motherfucker.
So you're just going to have to forgive me if I'm not buying the whole solemn, prayerful, we didn't really want to do this, but we had to routine. Spare me. But something that I find curious, since the articles were voted on, they haven't been presented to the Senate. And so since they haven't been presented to the Senate, according to the Senate rules as of this moment, no trial can commence. But I thought President Trump was such a threat to national security. I thought he committed such high crimes and misdemeanors that warranted his removal from office. And yet, his removal from office can't take place until he's tried in the Senate. I mean, the left just has no regard for the Constitution whatsoever. President Trump has been afforded no due process, and now he's being denied the right to a speedy trial. I mean, the concept of rights is just lost on the left. Now, like I said, Senate rules dictate that the articles of impeachment must be presented by the House managers before a trial can be set. Now, Mitch McConnell can do a couple of things at this point. He can set aside the impeachment and just dismiss it, which I think would be a mistake, especially at this point. If we get into mid-January and they still haven't delivered those articles, well, then I think a case could be made without there being a serious backlash that that the Senate is just moving forward without any regard for the process, and that they're just covering for the president. I think if it goes on that long, I think they're covered, especially with public opinion already turning on the left for this sham impeachment. But another thing he could do is move to amend the rules to either not require a trial or to begin a trial without having the articles of impeachment presented. Now, I think amending the rules to not require a trial, I think, is a bad idea. But I've heard that floated about. But if they amend the rules such that the presentation of the articles is not required, it seems to carry far less political risk, in my opinion. Especially if there's a time frame specified and we're talking about this dragging into the middle to the end of January. And then they can either dismiss the charges or proceed with a trial. Now, I think in either case, going forward with a trial is the way to go, because the articles of impeachment are public record. So is there really a need other than ceremony for them to be presented by the House? Alan Dershowitz says no. And as far as constitutional law goes, I'll listen to him anytime, because even though he's a liberal, but he's not a far left radical leftist like those that have taken over the Democrat Party. I mean, there's even a story that he's being considered for President Trump's legal team. But in his op-ed over at Newsmax, he says, and I quote, "It is difficult to imagine anything more unconstitutional, more violative of the intention of the framers, more of a denial of basic due process and civil liberties, more unfair to the president, and more likely to increase the current divisiveness among the American people. Put bluntly, it is hard to imagine a worse idea put forward by good people." Say what you will about Alan Dershowitz, him being a liberal or whatever, but he's been consistent when it comes to the Constitution and civil liberties. He's been consistent throughout the time that I've ever paid attention to politics. And he's right. He is 100% right in his assessment of what's going on with Nancy Pelosi. But here's part of Nancy Pelosi's reasoning behind why she is not presenting the articles of impeachment to the Senate.
Last night you suggested you need to see a fair process in the Senate.
Well, we'd like to see a fair process, but we'll see what they have, and we'll be ready for whatever it is. Yes, Chad?
Is that the requirement? You need to see a fair process before...
We would hope there would be a fair process, just as we hope that they would honor the Constitution. By the way, I saw some of it, I didn't see it, but I heard some of what Mitch McConnell said today, and it reminded me that our founders, when they wrote the Constitution, they suspected that there could be a rogue president. I don't think they suspected that we could have a rogue president and a rogue leader in the Senate at the same time. This is a serious matter, even though the majority leader in the United States Senate says it's okay for the foreman of the jury to be in cahoots with the lawyers of the accused.
Again, Pelosi invoking the Constitution, a document that I do not believe she's read, and no, she doesn't understand at all. Article 1, Section 3 of the United States Constitution, the Senate shall have the sole power of all impeachments. Nancy Pelosi has no say in the matter. None. Zero. Which is why I think that if Mitch McConnell were to change the rules regarding impeachments such that they don't need the articles to be presented from the House, I think that falls under the sole power provision of the Constitution. But the last part of that cut, and that was taken from two separate press conferences and cut together, so just so that there's no confusion, but I don't believe that anything has been taken out of context. But the second part, where she talks about Mitch McConnell being in quote unquote cahoots with the White House, their attitude seems to have done a complete 180. from 1998 and 99 during Bill Clinton's impeachment.
Any fair process would be consulting the White House because it's the president who's the defendant, and due process would guarantee him or fairness. Seems to me that no good case has been made for witnesses. What we ought to be doing instead of this is doing what the American people want us to do, which is make the schools better and preserve Social Security and rein in the HMOs.
Well, well, well.
Well, 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 indeed. I mean, there's nothing like shining a giant spotlight on the left's hypocrisy. I mean, let's face it, the only standards the left has are double standards. All right, let's move on because there's a ton of other stuff I want to get to. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, we're going to get into some Second Amendment news. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Virginia is taking their Second Amendment rights very seriously. Better late than never, I guess. You know what? Strike that. I'm not going to beat that horse anymore. We've talked about how they might not be in this position if they had voted in prior elections. That's the last time I'm going to mention that because they're doing the right thing now. Fair enough. As of now, there are over 100 counties, cities, and towns that have passed Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions. Virginia has very quickly become the standard bearer for Second Amendment rights. And it's been just about a month since they started this push. And in that time, in a month's time, over 100 localities have signaled that they are not going to enforce any unconstitutional laws infringing on their citizens' rights. And now Tazewell County has taken it to the next level. They recently passed 2 resolutions. The first declaring Tazewell County a Second Amendment sanctuary, meaning that they're not going to provide any funding for any effort that would infringe on the citizens of Tazewell County's Second Amendment rights. The second resolution emphasizes the right to a well-funded and well-regulated militia as described in the United States Constitution and in the Virginia State Constitution. But what it also does is allocate funding from the county budget for the purpose of funding and maintaining a well-regulated militia. This is something similar along the same lines as what Sheriff Scott Jenkins of Culpeper County did by vowing to deputize thousands of residents of Culpeper County. Now, Attorney General Mark Herring is making noise saying that if constitutional laws are passed, which, well, the laws will be passed, whether or not they're constitutional is another matter. But he's saying that if these laws are passed, they will be enforced. But if the county sheriffs and town sheriffs and police departments are refusing to enforce these laws on the grounds that they are unconstitutional, how exactly are these laws going to be enforced? He never makes that clarification. And some have suggested, as we've spoken about before, calling out the National Guard to enforce these laws, which would be ridiculous. What else are they going to do? Call the state police? Well, just like with the National Guard, state police troopers are more than likely among the people in these counties that are in support of these Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions. So how exactly is he planning on doing it? So not only do we not know how Mark Herring is planning on enforcing this law, but it puts his utter hypocrisy on full display because he has outright refused to enforce and defend a law that he says is unconstitutional. Herring's silence was deafening when Commonwealth's attorneys all across the state decided that they were not going to prosecute marijuana cases. But that does not square with his position now that police can't pick and choose which laws they want to enforce, even though the police and prosecutors have had that type of discretion forever. But he and some other elected officials are making noise about withholding funding and calling out the National Guard, which we talked about before. This fight in Virginia is going to be ugly. And it's going to be a fight until the next election, when all of the residents of the Second Amendment sanctuary counties go in and vote these anti-American, anti-Constitution leftists out of office. Because they see these resolutions as symbolic, with no force of law behind them. And while that's true to an extent, but what they do have behind them is the will of the people. And I'm going to bet on the will of the people every time. Another story that's pretty emblematic of this constitutional battle we're in right now for our Second Amendment rights is in Minnesota at St. Olaf College. The leadership of the college Republicans at St. Olaf College had their dormitory pods searched after the college received a report that they were storing guns and ammunition. These kids all lived in a dormitory pod with several bedrooms and a common living room and bathroom. Safety officers searched the pod, and of course they found nothing. It was a false report made because of their conservative politics. Now, Minnesota has a red flag law that's being debated right now. Thankfully, the state Senate is controlled by Republicans, and they have managed to block it thus far. But just suppose they hadn't. Suppose the red flag law was on the books, and someone reported those kids were planning some kind of attack or something, mass suicide, whatever. Those kids could have potentially had their Second Amendment rights stripped with no due process whatsoever. Now, I'm not going to even ask how the left can't see the danger in this, because, again, it's not about safety for the left. They don't care about your rights. If you're unfortunate enough to live in a state with a red flag law and someone reports you and you lose your Second Amendment rights, the left's attitude is, sorry about your bad luck, too effing bad. It's a win for them. They don't care. They don't recognize rights. During his failed presidential campaign, Robert Francis O'Rourke said that he did not recognize the Second Amendment as being a check on a tyrannical government. They don't recognize our rights. They don't recognize the Constitution. The Constitution to them is an inconvenience.
I'm constrained by a system that our founders put in place.
Exactly. The Constitution isn't the document that grants us rights. The Constitution is a document that limits what the government can do to us. All right, I wanted to get this story in before we take another quick break. A woman in Georgia was injured when two men broke into her home. They kicked in the front door. She managed to make it to her bedroom and lock the door, but they ran up the stairs, kicked in her bedroom door, and that was when gunfire was exchanged. Now, we don't have the details about what guns were used, who shot first. We don't have any of that. What we know is that she was injured in that shootout, and she was airlifted to a hospital where she underwent surgery. But like I said, we don't have the details about what guns were used and things of that nature. But it doesn't matter. This woman had a gun in her home, and she was able to defend herself. She was able to survive that encounter. But the left would have us think that this woman should not have been able to defend herself. And where would that leave her right now? Dead, most likely. And guess what? Just like the last story we talked about, they do not care. Her death, anyone's death at the hands of a criminal with a gun, is a win for them. It's a win. It's one more notch on their anti-Constitution belt. It's one more anecdote that they can point to and say, see, this is a gun violence epidemic and we need to do something. We need to take the guns away. But if they take the guns away and that happens to another person, and that person, man or woman, doesn't have a firearm in their home to protect themselves, they're going to end up dead. But guess what? The criminal still has their gun. And so then what is the argument going to be? You already took the guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens. There are already casualties as a result of that. So then what? Make it illegal for anyone under any circumstance to own any type of gun? Meth is illegal, isn't it? Cocaine is illegal. Theft is illegal. Murder is illegal. Yet these things happen every day. People use drugs every day, despite it being illegal. But their solution is to take away your right to defend yourself against the people that don't care about committing these acts of violence against you. But again, I sound like a broken record, I know, but this point is one that I cannot emphasize enough. It's not about safety. For the left, it's not about safety. For the left, it is about power and control. And as long as we, the people, have access to firearms to protect ourselves, they cannot gain the power and control that they want. And that, my friends, is how it needs to be. All right, y'all, we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, we're going to talk about the story out of Iowa where a man gets 15 years for burning the flag. So an Iowa man by the name of Adolfo Martinez was sentenced to 15 years in prison for stealing and burning the flag. Oh, you thought it was the American flag? No. This man was sentenced to 15 years for stealing and burning a gay pride flag off of a church. Leaving aside the notion of the gay pride flag flying over a church for a second, how is burning a rainbow flag worth 15 years in prison? Even if the person is a habitual offender or this is his third strike, how does this make even a bit of sense? Leftists claim that burning the American flag is protected speech, protected expression, but burning a gay pride flag is a hate crime? The American flag is a symbol of freedom. It's the banner under which we are all supposed to be united. It's the flag under which our fallen soldiers come home in their caskets. So don't talk to me about comparing the deaths of homosexuals, as tragic as it is, at the hands of bigots to the deaths of our soldiers. They died fighting for our freedom, for the idea that is America. Homosexuals died because homophobes, bigots, straight up assholes took out their fear and prejudices on those victims. And that is tragic. It's very sad. Don't get me wrong. I am not belittling their suffering at the hands of those people or advocating for anything like that. I'm just saying don't compare the two because there is no comparison. There's nothing anyone can tell me that will make me equate that flag with the American flag. It's just not going to happen. And think, just to put it in perspective, think about this. In Greece's penal code states that if someone insults the national anthem, Colin Kaepernick, destroys the flag or other national Greek symbols, they could go to prison for 2 to 3 years. In Germany, anyone who reviles or damages the German federal flag can get up to 5 years in prison. In France of all places, it's a crime to desecrate the French flag or even distribute images of the flag being desecrated. Now they only impose fines for that sort of thing, but still, it's France. And in Israel, burning the Israeli flag, punishable by a $15,000 fine or up to 3 years in prison. Now, the guy who burned this gay pride flag, he was a habitual offender, like I said. He had a lengthy criminal record. He stole property. He destroyed property. He deserves jail time. No question about it. And even under a 3-strike rule, 15 years, come on. Given his criminal history, 3 years for stealing and destroying private property? Okay, fine. I get it. But 15 years? Come on. And when you compare and contrast that with what happens to somebody who burns an American flag, it is absolutely beyond the pale. Okay, folks, we're going to wrap it up and get you out of here. And this is the part of the show that we would normally call Adventures of the Galactically Stupid. And I have a couple of clips for you. One of them would qualify regardless of the circumstances. But in this case, I have 2 clips. And rather than make fun and call them stupid, I'm just going to say that this is actually kind of sad.
I said what I was going to say, Nancy. When we bring the bill, which is, just so you know, there's a bill made in order by the Rules Committee that we can call up at any time in order to send it over to the Senate and to have the provisions in there to pay for the impeachment, and then the next step, and the whatever you want to call it, the trial.
Now, I've seen that clip a few times. I don't think the audio has quite the impact that the video does because it's really sad to watch. Nancy Pelosi was elected to the House of Representatives in 1987. She's been in office for 32 years. If there was ever a reason for term limits, if there was ever an advertisement for the need for term limits, that was it. But not to be outdone, later that night during the Democrat presidential debate, Joe Biden answered a question in a way that can only be described as Clintonian.
Vice President Biden, I'd like to ask you, 3 consecutive American presidents have enjoyed stints of explosive economic growth due to a boom in oil and natural gas production. As president, would you be willing to sacrifice some of that growth, even knowing potentially that it could displace thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of blue-collar workers in the interest of transitioning to that greener economy?
The answer is yes.
Now, I've made the same statements about Joe Biden that I just made about Nancy Pelosi. I've said before that his family should step in. I don't think that answer was indicative of his mental decline or advanced age. It was just stupid, especially when you consider this.
We're going to put a lot of coal miners and coal companies out of business.
Now, I don't know if that comment cost her the election in 2016, but it obviously didn't help because Donald Trump is your president. All right, folks, that's our show. But as I said in the beginning, this is going to be our last show of the year. And this week is Christmas, so I just want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas. I urge you, people who know me know that this is not my favorite time of year, even though perhaps it should be. It's not my favorite time of year because the reason for this season is lost on most people. It's very commercialized. It's driven a lot by materialism and people's materialistic human nature. And I got tired of that very early on. So I just want to urge my listeners to think about the reason for the season. I know that not everybody is Christian. Not everyone believes that Christmas is the celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ. That's fine. But those of you that do profess to be Christians, please keep that at the forefront. Because, as I said, that is the reason for the season. And it's something that I have to work at keeping in mind, because otherwise, seeing Christmas commercials before Halloween, being bombarded with car commercials, being bombarded with all these ridiculous advertisements just pisses me off. And I have to remember that I have to make sure that I keep in mind myself that it's not about that. Because otherwise I'd be walking around truly earning my Grinch stripes, because I'd be angry all the time until December 26th. So with that in mind, having said all of that, I do want to wish everyone who's listening a very Merry Christmas, a very Happy New Year, and we will be back in January bigger and better than ever. Now, while you're on Christmas break, don't forget to check us out on all your favorite podcast platforms: Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and check us out on social media at The Liberty Cast on all 4 platforms: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Parlay. We will be active on those platforms during the Christmas break, and I'm looking forward to interacting with all of you. You can also check us out on the website. It's thelibertycast.net. Go to the podcast page. You can find all the podcasts there. And I'm going to use this break, to post some new content on the blog as well. But again, thank you for spending this time with us. Have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Be safe out there. It goes without saying, don't drink and drive. I want you all back next year, safe and sound, listening, and bringing some friends with you to join in the fun. So until next year, keep your head on a swivel and stay safe, everybody.